Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. I hope you all had a nice month or so since season 3 finished. I really haven't had much time off. I was doing Patreon work and prepping this season. No rest for the wicked. We're now back with season 4. Huzzah and thrice huzzah. Over the next 10 weeks, we will be looking at the next 10 songs in the Roud Index, and they are all child ballads apart from today's song. So we've got today Roud 31, The Trees They Do Grow High, and then for the rest of the season, we've got Roud 32, which is Child Ballad 33, Kempy K, Roud 33, Child 41, Hind Etin, Roud 34, Child 43, The Broomfield Wager, Roud 35, Child 39, Tam Lin, Roud 36, Child 36, Captain Wedderburn's Courtship, Roud 37, Child 47, Proud Lady Margaret, Roud 38, Child 49, The Two Brothers, Roud 39, Child 52, The King's Daughter Jane, and Roud 40, Child 53, Lord Bateman. This is going to be a really interesting selection of songs. So let's get going. This week's song is Roud 31, The Trees They Do Grow High. Later on, we'll hear from our singer guest, Chris Foster. But for now, let's take a look at the history of the song with returning historical contributor, Sandra Kerr. Well, hello and welcome back to In the Roud, Sandra Kerr. Hello.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello. Great to have you back. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm good and very excited to be doing this again. It's such fun.
We had you back in the middle of season 2 for the Fair Flower of Northumberland, and
We
it's
did.
great that you were able to come on for a song this season and do this.
Absolutely. And I'm really pleased it's this ballad because it is so intriguing. There are so many bits to unpick and so many myths to unravel. Yes. And
Fantastic.
then, not to mention, a huge elephant in the room, which we can discuss later.
We will come to later on, I'm sure. Lovely. So, let's just dive straight in then. First of all, as usual, what's the song about? What's the plot? Does it have a plot, or is it one of those? Is it a sometimes, as we found with the Seeds of Love, there are lyrical songs in for songs. There are narrative songs. What are we dealing with this one?
It's widely referred to as a tragic ballad.
My favourite. My favourite.
Your favorite. We all have great pleasure with tragic
We
ballads.
we who doesn't love a bit of misery? It's fine, absolutely.
Does us good.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, let me say before I go into the actual nitty-gritty of the narrative that we've been discussing, chatting over coffee, drinks, whatever we were having, about how the number of entries, Roud entries, how many variants of this ballad are around. And it's an enormous number. I mean, whether we go by mine, which is 257, and yours, which is 3,071,071, it's somewhere in between. There's an awful lot of variants. Obviously, a hugely popular ballad. And in my estimation, not a dud amongst them. They are all absolutely enchanting in their
Yeah.
own ways, characterful, musical, engaging, and however they treat the narrative, which I will get to, I promise, Matthew, however they treat the narrative, it's always intriguing and sometimes for a tragic ballad, even funny or ironic. So, yeah, so a wonderful ballad. Do you want the narrative now?
Let's go for it. Yeah.
Let's go for it. Okay, so many of the variants begin with this um, opening imagery of trees growing so high, leaves growing so green, uh, and we'll come back to that. And a young woman lying. I'm sorry, this we could be here for days. A young woman is lying alone, and we hear her then complain that her father has married her off to a young boy who is, quote, too young, unquote, make of that what you will. Father says, no, it's fine, all will be well, because we're going to send him to college and we'll let everybody know he's married by putting a blue ribbon around him. In some versions, a green ribbon,
Oh.
according to what is known in a particular culture. So he's sent off to college. Oh, and importantly, the father says, while he's growing, you'll be a lady. Now, the implication is because they're married, she'll now have increased her status. So the implication already is that this arranged marriage has a property element. Sorry, that's not narrative, that's comment.
That's fine.
Narrative. Next, she goes to have a look at him to see how he's cooking. She goes to see him at school and he's playing football or just playing with his mates.
Uh,
He's doing well.
And this is where, yeah, lots of different songs, including things like The Cruel Mother we did in season one, have this motif about looking over the wall and seeing boys playing at
Yes,
ball. That's a
yes.
recurring thing in lots of different songs.
It is. And oh, again, we could come back to that and discuss that for a long time. What is this peeping over a wall
I
thing?
don't know,
It's a
yeah,
bit covert,
it's
isn't it?
suspect, yes.
However,
Yep.
she does that. Now, in one or two versions, but not all of them by any means, there's often a verse about them going out into the hayfield for some sport and play. And in one of the versions, what they did there, she never would declare, but she never more complained of his growing. So we have a change. I mean, somebody, I forget which of the great academics, um, has described the filmic quality of balladry and the fact that everything is different at the end of the ballad from how it was at the beginning of the ballad. And in many ways, The Trees They Do Grow High is classic in that sense, a real classic kind of instance, an example of that. Anyway, so she doesn't complain about his growing. However, uh, they do marry. She has a child, and within a year, she's a widow. There's often then a little insight into the very particular way of grieving or marking a passing of somebody, the death of somebody. She's going to stitch him a shroud, and sometimes it's of the oriental blue, sometimes it's ornamental brown, sometimes it's Holland, which of course was a very fine linen. But that's a little kind of insight into something very particular to do with ritual around death. Then we come to the end where everything is different to how it was at the beginning. At the age of 16, some of the ballads versions say, at the age of 16, he was a married man. At the age of 17, the father to a son. At the age of 18, the grass grew over him. Cruel death had put an end to his growing. In one version, I find this a very unkind and rather dismissive final line. That soon put an end to his growing. It's kind of quite ugly, I feel. But there we are. That's a comment again, in my
Yeah.
opinion. So, can I just add this final um, uh, variant, really, in the text that I absolutely love? Harry Brazel, for instance, in his version, this is so beautiful. Can I just read the final verse?
Yeah,
Now,
sure.
I'll buy my love a coffin, the best of Erin Brown. And while they are making it, those tears they shall flow down. I'll weep for him, I'll mourn for him until the day I'll die, and I'll rear his loving son while he's growing. I just think that is so, so beautiful. That final verse in Harry Brazel's version,
Yeah, that's much. It's certainly different from a lot of the other versions, and
isn't it?
more of an emotional end rather than a
Very
sort
emotional
of a
and
cold
very
sort of description of what's happened.
absolutely, and very personal, Matthew, don't you think? I'll
Absolutely.
do this, I'll weep for him, I'll mourn for him. Just beautiful. But I'll rear his loving son while he's growing. That's very interesting because again, in folk song generally, but often in balladry as well, you have that final message of hope and positivity, which is very interesting to find in what is essentially a tragic ballad, as we've pointed out already.
Yeah, yeah,
Have
absolutely.
that final thing. Never mind, I'll look after his son while he's growing. I'll make sure he gets through, kind of thing. Very interesting.
Well, I guess that lad now, yeah, the son that she's going to call it is the heir to the property, I suppose.
Well, that's a very good point. And yes,
There's all
it's
that to go with it.
secured, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Excellent.
lovely. So that's that. So is this? Yeah, you said this is. We had certainly. I found the Roud index to have 376 entries
Yeah.
for this. But obviously, as we keep saying, don't go by that really because that'll include duplicates and triplicates because the same version will turn up in multiple
Yeah.
printing or multiple
Yeah.
recordings and things. So it's not as high as that, but it's maybe a third of that, just over a third. So maybe looking at around 150, 200 versions, maybe.
Yeah.
It depends. And I haven't gone through and had a look at unique versions, but it certainly seems to be. And looking at the index, because it whittles it down by country as well, you can filter it by country. And it seems
Yeah.
pretty widespread. I mean, in the sort of English speaking world, we got England, mostly England,
Yeah.
and then Scotland, then Ireland, and then
Hmm.
Canada and the USA and Northern Ireland, and then one version in Australia.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this seems pretty a decent spread. This song,
It's an enormous spread. It's enormously popular. I mean, it clearly was um, a, a very engaging narrative for people that they identified with. I mean, goodness me, for large parts of our history, until comparatively recently, in terms of real historical time, child, um, um, what's the word I want? Mortality was
yeah.
so widespread. There couldn't have been a family that wasn't touched by the mortality, the death of child. And I suppose because he's described as young, he's young, all the time. Then that's one thing that people identified with greatly, I assume.
Yeah,
We,
absolutely. I think
but
so.
as I keep saying, we'll come back to that.
Indeed. So, how far back can we trace this then? What's the
Oh,
earliest version we have? I can only assume it's always a printed source, the earliest one we've got.
well, the earliest printed source is James Johnson's Scots Musical Museum, 1792.
1792. Very
Yeah.
good.
And then there's Maiden's North Country Garland, which was 1824. And he prints the young laird of Craigstoun. Craigstoun. Um, now, where else? Now this is there's so much here to unpick, Matthew, in terms of, well, just how old is this? I mean, we glibly reiterate things that people like Bert Lloyd have said, and we just accept them, don't we? Let me just find what Bert said.
Yeah.
Um, what does Bert say? Can I quote you this? Bert Lloyd, a ballad common, this is Trees They Grow High, a ballad common all over the British Isles. Scottish, Irish, and English versions resemble each other in text, but not always in tune. Absolutely right there, Bert.
Yeah.
There is a story that the ballad was made after the death in 1634 of the juvenile Laird of Craigton, who married a girl some years older than himself. Oh my gosh, it is only a story, and it is absolutely not based in any fact whatsoever. In fact, a lot of work has been done on this, and I think it's clear, absolutely clear.
Yeah, because that was on the note. That was part of the sleeve notes for an album he did in 1960, wasn't it? And I think
It
a lot
was
of
in
research, a lot of research has been done since then.
has been
And
done
I
since
think you have to
then.
remind people that you can go for historical research and stuff by looking at what other the work other people have done on sleeve notes of albums and things. But you've got to remember that a lot of research has been done since 1960, and so they were
Exactly,
going by what they knew at the
exactly.
time.
But it has been repeated many a time and oft, Matthew,
Right?
this
Okay.
point that he's made, mentioning the Laird of Cragton, but also, or Craigton, also, this gets repeated by so many people. In fact, the song, this is what he says on the notes that you're referring to. In fact, the song is probably older and may have originated in the Middle Ages when the joining of two family fortunes by child marriage was not unusual. In fact, this is me talking now. It was fairly unusual. Not, not unusual. It was not usual.
Yeah, yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does. Yes.
And there's quite a lot. I mean, for instance, parish records, for instance, show. Let me find. Here we are. Um, According to parish records, the average age for marriage in medieval times was between 17 and 25 across much of Europe in the Middle Ages. The average age for women was 20 to 26 in Elizabethan England, and many writers of the time condemned child marriages. So they were performed, of course, between aristocratic families, but here we come to the rub, it seems to me. They were marriages of older men to young child women,
Yeah,
young women or young female children,
but not
you know,
young men.
and not young men to older women. Why would that be? It doesn't make sense if we're looking at marriages between dynasties to cement power, to cement property, to
Yeah.
cement land. Why would you have an older woman who possibly would not be able to bear healthy children that would last and continue the dynasty? That's why you get older men and younger women, younger brides, as
Is
it
there
were.
are there any versions of this that actually
Uh,
specify the age of the woman?
well, if we go to the Craigton thing,
Because I was
um,
just thinking that I wonder
yeah,
if because they she theoretically could only be in her early 20s, but if he's 16, 17, she
yes,
could be a bit
actually,
older, not like decades older, but a short bit older.
isn't there a version where she's 21? And
You're quite right.
yes, there
So there
is.
is, and I was just thinking
There is.
maybe if I don't know. This is me totally speculating here.
That's fine.
I wonder if a pretext to what happens before the song starts in terms of the narrative. The one if possibly this could be a thing where the reason he's so young and being married off is that maybe he's ill and the family know that he will die in 2 or 3 years from something, so they need him to be married in order to father a son and carry on the lineage. there could be
Yeah,
that to do with it, but who knows? But that's
yes.
that's an answer. But
It's an answer in this particular instance,
yeah, yeah,
but in terms of the general history,
sure, yeah,
it doesn't make sense, and
right,
and it has to be said, and it's a cruel fact that the same pertains today. Child marriages are always older and sometimes old men and girl children. You
yes,
know, it
indeed,
which cruel though it may be, and it certainly is anomalous in this day and age, if it ever wasn't. It's just what that was the fact of the matter. So I find it really interesting that
mm.
this ballad has continued with this actually rather odd setup.
It's the other way
You know,
around. Yeah,
yeah, do you not find that a bit
it's
odd
certainly yeah. I always
and
it sort of
interesting?
I never really considered it, but it was always at the back of my mind. I thought, oh, it's odd. It's
Yeah,
usually the other way around, but yeah,
yes, exactly.
yeah.
That's what I meant by the elephant in the room now.
And
I
maybe that's what maybe that's something to do with why this song is spread around a bit so boldly because it's so odd compared to what would have been the norm for that kind of practice.
Yes, well, possibly. I
Yeah.
don't know. There could be an argument made for the patriarchy triumphing once again and appropriating a bit of history,
Well,
of mythology, and perpetrating it as fact. Who knows? I'm only throwing that in, Matthew. Perish the thought that I should upset the academic apple cart in any
it's
way.
fine. It's a safe space here. It's all fine. It's
Quite
all
right.
fine.
Thank you, Matthew. So I've forgotten where we are now. What were we talking about?
I'm not entirely sure where we got to. We were
We
but we were
talked.
on the legend of the juvenile Lord Creighton.
Yes. Now, most of
1634, his death in 1634, which actually did happen, but whether or not it's anything to do with this song.
now let's go to. He was actually John Urquhart, who Lord Craigston. And he was an inheriting grandson for various reasons. His father and grandfather and so on were persona non gratis, and he inherited the estate. He was born in 1611 and was 10 years older than his wife, Elizabeth Innes, who was born in 1621. So when they married, this would make him 22 years old and Elizabeth 12 years old. So that doesn't measure up to the whole Urquhart thing. Sorry, Creighton thing.
Right.
So
Okay.
when he did die very young, but then most people did in those days. He was 23 when he died, and Elizabeth Urquhart was still only 13 years old and had no children. So, trying to pin it down to that particular dynasty is
Yeah.
very odd. I don't know why. Do you know, it did make me wonder why we love to try and pin our ballads and songs onto something very, very particular. Why do we do
I
that?
think I
Matthew, got
think
any
it I
ideas?
think it in some ways for a lot of people gives them an air of legitimacy
Yeah,
in the sense that well this actually happened, therefore I can sing this song. There was a traditional singer, gypsy singer from Sussex, no, not Sussex, somewhere else. Phoebe Smith's brother, Charlie Scamp.
right. Oh,
There's
yes,
recordings of
yes.
Charlie Scamp, and pretty much I think there's about three or four on a later Voice of the People collection, and almost every song of his starts with him saying, "Now this is a true story about a lady that lived 5 miles down." And I reckon he was making it up, but he tried for the collector. He was clearly saying that this happened to a lady not lived not far from here. He was trying to make them
Yeah,
all in quotes legitimate or give them an air
legitimate.
of authority, not authority, but yeah, legitimacy and authenticity, and
Absolutely.
a bit of sort of there's a slight tangential thing here about films which I could go into. I'll briefly do this. It's only taken 20
No,
minutes
no,
to
go
get to
for
some
it.
films. there's a
Yeah.
thing with horror films and the horror genre. I'm a big
Right.
thing about this.
Right.
In a lot of horror and a lot of horror subgenre stuff tends to get overlooked or at least dismissed by film critics and by sort of general audiences as being a bit
Right.
lower down the food chain in
Yeah. Yeah.
terms of being, oh, it's, it's not a high drama or it's high art or anything. It's just people getting killed, blah blah, which is not the case usually. I mean, people do get killed, but there's things going on. Except the ghost story and the ghost and films about ghosts and things, because the
Right.
ghost kind of subgenre of horror in general, but horror cinema is rooted in literature. The literature always had
Ah,
ghost stories. You
right.
know, even
Right.
Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol,
Oh, totally.
and I reckon that's where the origin of why people tell ghost stories at Christmas is from Christmas Carol. But literature was all did deal with a lot of ghostly stuff, and
Yeah.
people always told ghost stories around campfires and things. And so films about ghosts tend to get a bit more of a fair crack of the whip when it comes to critical appraisal and the general public
Yeah.
because it's rooted in something as in quotes legitimate as high
As
literature
literature.
and things.
Literature.
And
Yeah.
so anyway, that's a tangent, but it's there's that. And so I think people if people think that a song some people, whoever have think that a song is rooted in something that actually happened, it does give it in their mind an air of legitimacy or an authenticity, and maybe
Yeah.
something that's a bit more, maybe a bit more important, and a song that is worth singing rather than something as trivial as the Derby Tup or something.
There you
You know,
go. Yeah.
that's my thoughts on the matter.
I think that's totally valid. I think it makes total sense.
Phew, I'm glad. I always get nervous when I voice my opinion in front of my old university lecturers, and I go, no, and they go, "Yes, you're quite right, Matt." I thought, thank God for that.
No,
No, that's
goodness
fine.
me. Listen, if you came out of the folk degree course and weren't making sense and weren't using your intelligence, we failed.
Well, no,
So
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
what
that's
I'm
fine.
saying is, blimey, we did a good job, didn't we,
There we
with
go.
that,
There we go.
Matthew? I'm
Thank
agreeing with
you.
him. No, I
Excellent.
think it's great, Matthew. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's absolutely it makes total sense. And I love the fact that you've made the analogy with horror films. Actually, have you come across Ian Pittaway? He's um,
No.
he writes a site which is absolutely wonderful called Early Music Muse. He's early music musician and
Okay.
singer and great expert, absolutely fabulous stuff. And this is what he says, following on from what you just stated. He said to be effective, and I'm reading this now,
Yeah.
this is not my faultless memory, this is me actually reading. To be effective and affecting, songs, plays, and novels, and you and I could add film, do not have to be based on a real person's biography. Such tragic ballads, and he's reflecting the trees they do grow high here. Such tragic ballads reflect reality in as much as they depict the kind of heartbreaking events familiar to their listening audience. Its pathos is in identification with the injustice of youngsters deprived of their freedom in love, the emotional pull of the young love that develops, sympathy for and identification with the grief for a husband dying too soon and a woman left to bring up a child on her own. We don't what he's saying is we don't have to kind of pin it down to a very particular thing. It actually springs from the well of lived experience. And I think this is particularly important for singers,
Yeah.
if they're asking themselves, how do I treat a ballad like this? What do I want in my mind when I'm singing this narrative or telling this song, as some people say, and that knowledge, that underlying knowledge of how life was for people and how universal some of those themes are, can really help us, I think, in interpretation.
Absolutely. I think yeah, there was something It's a long time ago now. I remember Dad saying this. I was relatively, I'd say, very young. I probably mid-teens, I think, so 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh, and I remember being at our folk club in Sussex at the Royal Oak in Lewes, and Nancy and James were performing. I remember it was
Right.
Nancy Kerr and James Fagan performing, and they did that version they used to sing of Locks and Bolts.
Yes,
The
lovely.
the father disapproving of daughter's choice of boyfriend, so he locks his daughter in the cellar and stuff. And the song finished, and my dad said, "See, who said folk songs aren't topical?" Because at that point we just had the whole in the news. We just had the whole Joseph Fritzl thing in the news about the
Oh
guy
my
who kept his
God.
daughter in the basement for 20 years and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And so you know, there's a whole debate with people say, "Oh, these old folk songs don't mean anything." I think a lot of these folk songs
Oh,
still have a lot of relevance. I mean, Locks and Bolts isn't quite as bad as the whole Joseph Fritzl debacle, but
yeah.
nevertheless, there's the idea about a father locking his daughter in the cellar
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
however long, and although in that song the boyfriend that the father disapproves of breaks in and frees her, so it's a hooray for the man song in that respect. But unfortunately, but
I'll go along with that,
yeah, yeah,
Matthew.
that's fine. Yeah, yeah. And so, but you get folk songs can be topical still, and you end this song
Absolutely.
with the single mother essentially, and that's a thing. Single parents now, and due to an all number of reasons as to why one is a single parent at the moment, and so
Yeah.
there's all sorts
Yeah.
of things. This isn't arcane subject matter in a way.
Absolutely not. And I mean, I've always felt, and I'm sure we discussed this when you were on the folk degree course, but I've always felt that how one introduces a ballad or a song um, greatly or hopefully influences how people hear it and receive it. And I mean, if one made with this particular ballad, one only has to mention child marriage around the world, which is still prevalent, which is still an issue which governments and agencies, aid agencies, and so on are working against and trying to alter. One only has to mention that to make the ballad really live even more than it does through
Yeah.
its own narrative. Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
stuff, really important stuff.
And so another thing to talk about, I guess, with this is Robert Burns.
We could talk about Robert Burns, couldn't we?
Who actually the thing that stems from Robert Burns is what I think. I actually really like the outcome of this Robert Burns thing. That the song, it depends how it's performed, but we'll come to the recording later. But there's a recording of Lizzie Higgins, daughter of
Yes,
Jeannie Robertson, singing
yes.
this Scots song. Is it called My Bonnie Boy, or is it called something else?
Well,
I did have
yeah,
the
she called it "The Bonnie Boy is Lang Lang a Growing,"
yes.
but she also sang the other version, which is attributed to Burns, quite erroneously apparently, which is Lady Mary Ann with its bouncy little tune.
That's right, and it's interesting that Stanley Robertson also sang a version, but not the Lady
Yeah,
Mary Ann one, even though they're related. Even though they
yeah.
must have heard that one at
Oh,
some point.
I think that's quite characteristic of families, isn't it? Families of singers that actually you don't sing the same version. That's Mum's version, or that's Great Auntie Edith's version, or Uncle Harry's version.
Sometimes they just sing the songs they learnt from their mum or their dad or whatever, and then sometimes it's, oh no, that was mum's song. So
Yes,
there's a
exactly.
sort of not quite a half and half divide. I haven't totted up the responses, but one could attempt a sort of
Yeah,
posthumous survey on traditional singers, try
you
and
could.
figure that one out.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to do that actually,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? And
But
of course, as ever, we don't know because collectors didn't ask enough of
quite
questions like that,
quite
did they?
so. But
Of
Lizzie
their
Higgins,
involvement.
Lizzie Higgins had Langer Growing, which sang to Hamish Henderson, but also had Lady Mary Ann, and this is the
Yeah,
interesting thing.
yeah.
Back to Robert Burns.
Incidentally, her Bonnie Boys Lang Lang a Growing version, the pipe tune was suggested by her father, who, of course, was it Donald? Was it?
Quite possibly,
Was it her
yeah.
grandfather?
I can't remember.
No, it's her father, wasn't it? Anyway, who was the piper and suggested, because she didn't like the tune apparently that she had. I wonder, now that needs unpicking a bit, and I haven't done that, I have to say. But I'm curious to know why she didn't like the melody that she had to the ballad, and then
No.
put it to a pipe tune, which fits it beautifully.
Yeah.
So yes,
But
interesting.
Robert Burns, however,
Yes. um, there's rather a nice note on a Jean Redpath album, The Songs of Robert Burns, Volume 1, where she noted this. This song, and she's talking about Lady Mary Ann here, a fine example of Burns in his dual role as folk song collector and poet. The air, a traditional tune of striking beauty. Do you know, I wouldn't call it striking beauty. I think it's rather bouncy and jolly for a tragic, and it's not even a tragic ballad in that version.
no, it's not.
Nobody dies. Nobody dies, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad of that, of course. The lyrics, she says, are based on traditional balladry. To, they're related to, what are they related to? An 8-line fragment found in Hurd's manuscript of 1776. We're still not going back further than Scott's Musical Museum, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not, it's obviously around that time, thus gathering his materials from the folk past, she says of Burns. The poet fashioned his own personal creation. So, you know, it was there, both in melody and an 8-line fragment.
So yeah, Lady Marianne actually starts with certainly the one that Lizzie Higgins sings starts with. I'll read this out. Lady Marianne looked over the castle
Over.
wall. I'm
Yeah.
not going to do a Scots thing. I'm translating this into English as I go. Lady
Right.
Marianne looked over the castle wall when she saw three bonny laddies a playing at the ball, and the youngest he was the flower among them all. He's my bonny bonny boy, I and he's
And
and growing oh.
and
And so
growing up. Yeah.
that's yeah, that's not the first verse when you get to the other versions.
No, not at all. It's interesting, isn't it? So we've left out the time passing, you know, the kind of scene setting of trees growing high, etc., and lying alone. And
However,
we,
the that bit turns up in the end at the last verse.
yes, of
Uh,
her version.
yeah, they've
Yeah.
somehow it's been swapped around.
Yes, it's so interesting. What
The
how?
summer it is going, and the leaves they are green, and the
Yeah.
days are away that we have seen. Far better days I trust will come again for my bonny laddies young and growing oh. So it's become a sort of
There we are.
a closing statement rather than a scene setting.
Yes, isn't that interesting?
But then we
Comes
do get the
together.
second verse, which is Father, dear Father, I'll tell you what to do. So we still get that bit and send him to college for a couple of years. And around his cap, I will sew the ribbons blue for to let the ladies know that he's growing rather than married. I'm sure everyone knows he's growing. He's anyway. I don't know, but you know,
But that's interesting again because that's swapped round. In many of the versions, it's the father who says, "We'll do that," because she's complained that he's too young. So it's the father who says, "We'll send him off to college."
and in this one, it's
And
her.
round his
Yeah,
hat, we'll tie. Oh, I do like the difference between we'll tie a ribbon blue, that's what the bloke would do, and she's going to sew it.
sew it. That's right.
Oh dear.
Yes, indeed, and yeah, and it sort of varies a bit, doesn't it? After that, but because it's not quite the same as because normally then it goes in the other versions it goes straight to the verses about um at the age of 16 he was married, at the age of 17 he was a
Yeah,
father,
yeah.
whereas in this Lady Mary Ann Robert Burns we've got there's then a verse about Lady Margaret. Lady Margaret was a flower in the dew, sweet and bonny, bright was her hue, and the longer she blossomed, the sweeter she grew.
She
For
grew,
the lily
yes.
in the border will be bonnier. Oh, it's all this nice flowery description. This is obviously, yeah, this is much more poetic than overtly poetic
Yeah,
than the other ones. This has obviously been written
isn't
by
it?
someone. You can sometimes you can tell whether something's been sort of evolved through the oral
Yes,
tradition, or
yes.
it's actually
Or
been written down by someone. And
indeed,
this is very much that.
absolutely.
And young Charlie Cochrane says, obviously, yeah, we've gone back to
Yes, we get names now.
young Charlie Cochrane was as proud as an ache. What's an ache?
Oak, an
Oak.
oak.
Oh, thank you. There you go. That's me misreading things. Was proud as an oak, blithe and bonny and straight was his make, and the sun it shone all for his sake, and he will be the brag of the forest. And
Yeah.
then the summer it is green, the leaves they are summer it is going, the leaves they are green,
Yes,
and then it ends. No one dies.
no one dies.
It's
And that,
interesting why that particular version then is no, it's not. Don't matter. It's a different version that was included on the Voice of the People's Tragic Ballads CD. I assumed it was that
yes.
one. It's not that
No,
one.
it's not.
I
It's not.
think the Lizzie Higgins one is actually on the one labeled Ballads. Yes, it is. There we go. It's in.
There we go.
It's on ballads rather than tragic ballads because no
Yeah.
one dies. Very good.
Going back slightly,
Yeah, yeah.
or in fact, not just slightly, but rather a long way, when we were talking about origins, and I remember saying to you, you know, in the past, people like Bert, for instance, would state something on sleeve notes or in a book or whatever, and it would then get repeated as though it were true. Where in the
Yeah.
first instance, he may or may not have researched that or may have come up with the theory, much like we're doing today. um, but the same thing has happened, it has to be said, the same thing has happened with Roy Palmer, for whom I had and have enormous respect for the work that he did. But Roy stated that the trees they do grow high was sung in a Shakespeare play. While we're trying to nail down how old this ballad
Oh,
is, he
okay.
says, yes, this is what Roy Palmer claims in Every Man's Book of English Country Songs. One of the characters sings a snatch of the quote old ballad, meaning a version of the trees, in the Two Noble Kinsmen. Is there? I didn't know there was a play of Shakespeare's called The Two Noble Kinsmen, but apparently there was, which was probably written 1612 to 1614, first published in 1634. Now, if that's the case, that makes this a very much older ballad than we think it is.
Yeah, so the Two Noble Kinsmen is attributed jointly to John Fletcher and
John
William
Fletcher,
Shakespeare,
yeah,
and it
absolutely.
derives from the Knight's Tale as part of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, apparently. So yeah, but if there's something in there that sounds like this, yeah,
Well, what I was going to go on to say was that Ian Pittaway, this excellent musician and researcher, I mean, I just have so much respect for the work he's doing. Really thorough research. He says Roy Palmer doesn't state which character sings the song, nor does he give the words sung, nor the act or the scene. And Pittaway says, I've read the play and word searched it electronically. There is no mention of an old ballad, nor any reference to a song that resembles or implies the trees they do grow high. Isn't that interesting? So where did
yeah.
Roy get that?
Oh,
Why did he state that? Has he taken that from some other academic, some other researcher, who, I don't know, through misunderstanding or miscalculation or whatever, misreading, has stated it to be so? You know, it's so interesting. It does mean you can't actually trust much, can you? You
no,
have to kind
yeah.
of go and look for yourself. And
That
now
was
I'm trusting that Ian Pittaway has read that play, which I have not.
Well, that
But
is a thing that one of the things I've learned from Steve Roud through my work on this podcast and
yeah,
chatting to him a lot is
yeah.
never trust anyone.
Well,
If you find something that's written down, try and find out if that's true. Don't trust it. Do the work
yeah,
yourself as well and see if
there
it
we
still
go.
rings true.
Well, there we go.
So
If
yeah, just
Steve says it, I
indeed.
have to agree with him in this instance.
Yeah. And then there's also, because I know we were saying that the sort of the earliest sources we've got for this song are Scottish, but there's a
Yeah,
lot of debate, and a lot of people reckon that it's possibly Irish in origin, even though we can only
they
go back to
do.
Scotland with this
They
one.
do indeed. And I have to say, Joe Heaney's version, which I absolutely love, and which has been one of the ballads I've consistently played to students on the folk degree course over the decades, it's is an incredibly full version. Absolutely. Every detail is in there. And in terms of structure, we were talking earlier about why isn't it a child ballad? In terms of structure and all those elements that we usually associate with absolute classic child balladry, it's all there. It has it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So do have a look at that, Matthew. And I mean, I know you're going to ask me at some point which recordings of source singers I would recommend. I most certainly would recommend Joe's version, not just because it is so full, but because it's beautifully sung, absolutely beautifully sung.
Great, yeah. We will do. We'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
Are there anything you wanting to mention something more about the tying ribbon stuff?
Oh, did I?
I
Okay.
think
I
you
thought
did.
I'd kind of said it. The color, the color changes in different versions. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's green. I just thought it was kind of fun that
Okay.
in Lizzie Higgins' version, Dad's gonna
Yeah, yeah.
she's going to sew it round his hat, and in a lot of the English versions, Dad's gonna tie it around his waist or tie it around
Yes.
his hat. Just
Yeah. I mean, we're saying things about folk songs being topical and relatable to sort of modern perspective.
indeed.
But if I got married at the age of 15 and then went to college, I they would not even my father would have put a ribbon around my arm or around my hat or something. And the thought of having to wear a ribbon for 3 years just to tell all the other ladies to just to warn them that I'm actually married and either you shouldn't come near me or if I do come near you, you'll know that I'm actually married. That's not a thing that happens anymore. Or did it ever happen? Is that poetic license for this particular song? Was
Oh,
that ever a thing?
now that's interesting. I did read something about that, but I don't think I made a note of it. I did. I read something where, now which site? It might have been on Ian Pittaway's site, but
Oh, there
perhaps
was a.
not.
I did find a bit on something that Kenneth Goldstein wrote.
Ah, right.
Because he
Yes.
wrote because it was that album that Ewan McCollum Burt Lloyd did, the Great British Ballads Not Included in the Child Collection, and Kenny
Right.
Goldstein wrote some
Right.
things about it, in which including a bit about the Lord Creighton. Um, but the
Yeah.
use of a coloured ribbon as a marriage token has been a centuries old tradition, both in Britain and in parts of the continent, and still exists in rural folk communities. But I'm not going to trust that. I'd like to find out if other sources say the same thing and not just
Yes.
trust one
Yes.
source. But that's what Kenny Goldstein said.
That's it. I knew I'd read that somewhere too. So thanks, Matthew. Yes.
There you go. I answered my own question there.
Yeah, well, good.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be. But that's interesting, isn't it? Because again, where does that come from? And is it centuries old?
Yeah,
Really?
I don't know.
Why does that not crop up very much in any other balladry then? Does it
I don't
crop
know.
up?
It's not something I've come across in other
Recall it?
ballads
No,
and things. No.
no, no. So again, I think we have to go with Steve and say, don't believe anybody. And if we want to know, look for ourselves. But
Indeed.
it does seem to be a motif that only crops up in that ballad, Matthew, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those sort of unique things for this one. Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, that's something to ponder. Is there anything else you want to bring up before we come on to the recommended listening?
I think,
I mean, we could discuss this for days, but
oh, absolutely. There's so much
in the
in this.
confines of this conversation, have we reached
Yes.
the end?
No, I think at the end of my inquiry into this, I wrote a little note to myself. Um, all this inquiry begs a couple of questions. Why are we so keen to staple or pin our ballads down and assert that they're based on fact, which I think we've kind of discussed and explored fairly succinctly, Matthew, haven't
I
we?
think so. Yeah,
Fairly.
yeah,
And then my other question was the big elephant in the room. Why have the ages been changed when then, as now, it's usually young girls that are married to older men and not um, older women who are married to young boys, which is
yeah,
very unusual and would have been then, because there is no economic or social sense to it, physiological
yeah,
sense. And again, I think we probably answered that. We talked about that fairly extensively.
yeah.
So I can't think of any other questions
That's fine. That's all right.
I have for this. But as you say, I mean, certainly in terms of um, ballad singing, I think there's an awful lot that we could talk about,
Yeah.
which would give us ways into interpreting this absolutely beautiful ballad, extraordinary ballad.
And it was very, very popular song amongst people who we would call, in quotes, traditional singers.
Indeed.
And we've got field recordings of quite a lot. We normally in this podcast, I try and limit these to like when I do, when I say to the in prep to the person I'm interviewing, I would say pick up to five, and I'll pick up to five, and then we end up not managing to come up with any, or maybe just three or something. But we've actually got about 16 on
We
the list.
have amazing. And I
We'll
think you
see
had,
if we actually mention them or not. But nevertheless,
okay,
it's an
go on then.
indication of how popular this was on the traditional side of the oral tradition side that was at least collected and recorded. So there's quite a lot of names,
Absolutely.
and within them are some fantastic versions.
Indeed, there are.
Who are we going to
Uh,
start with?
oh dear. Well, as I say, for me, I would definitely point people towards the version sung by Joe Heaney.
Yes, absolutely.
It's in absolute classic Shanos style. It's an incredibly full text and sung with such immense feeling that, I mean, I can never hear it without feeling that lump in my throat and tears start, which is extraordinary. It's what you want. When people say that to me about, oh, this song makes me cry, well, yes, of course it does. That's what art is meant to do. It's meant to make you feel something.
Yeah,
But Joe's is most definitely for me one I would definitely point people to. It's interesting too that it illustrates something, if we've got time for this, Matthew, it illustrates something Joe talked to you and Peggy about, which was ornamentation.
right.
Uh, and he was very accurate and particular in explaining why he would use ornamentation in his singing. He said, for instance, and I'm afraid I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah,
Um, he said, for instance, if you have a word that has got just one syllable, you have space to ornament. If you have a word which is more than one syllable, there isn't space to ornament because the voice is taken up with getting from one syllable to another. Now, Joe didn't put it like that, and I do apologize because I can't remember exactly, but that was absolutely what he was saying. The other thing was that he said he could see the shape of a melody in his head.
yeah.
And therefore he could see where he could ornament in advance. He knew that. So I thought that was always very interesting in terms of uh, the expertise of the ballad singer, the traditional ballad singer, the classic source singer that we would turn to go, well, how do you sing this stuff? How did they sing this stuff? So I thought that was pertinent. So I would say, listen to Joe, listen to Seamusini.
Absolutely fantastic stuff. Who else have we got?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think since we've talked about Lizzie
Oh
Higgins,
yeah,
I think we ought to listen to her two versions. They're both recorded, aren't they?
yes, I've certainly got access to one of those, the Robert Burns one, the Lady Mary Ann,
The Lady Mary Ann,
and the other one
yes.
I think is
She
somewhere
called
else.
what? The Bonny Boy is Lang Lang a Growing. She
That's right.
sang it. Oh, she sang it to Hamish Henderson in 1954, and Peter Hall did a note for it. So it must be recorded somewhere. Must be
Yeah, yeah, it's
published
on.
somewhere.
There's a 1960s LP called Folk Songs and Music from the Berry Fields of Blair, and there's a folk legacy anthology called Ballads and Songs of Tradition,
Right.
and then uh, there was a Lizzie Higgins LP called Princess of the Thistle from 1969
Goodness,
that it's
is
on there.
there
That's on there. It's
Princess of the Thistle?
Princess of the Thistle, and it's on there. It's the last track, and they've called it the College Boy brackets Young Craigston.
There we go. Ah,
But
interesting.
that's other people labeling the song because they think it's about that rather than
Yes,
whatever Lizzie
yes,
Higgins called it. My
yeah,
bonny
and for
boy is
whatever
Lang.
reason, yeah,
Yeah. But yeah,
excellent.
I've certainly heard the recording of Lizzie singing the Lady Mary Ann, and it's absolutely sensational.
Yes, absolutely.
And Tony Engel recorded Lizzie singing Lady Mary Ann at her home in Aberdeen in January of 1975, and that's
Right.
on the Voice of the People anthology. It fell on a day, a bonny summer day, which is volume 17 of the Voice of the
There we
People.
go. That's lovely. I'm looking for um, a quote from Harry Brazill. I'm wondering, it'd be nice um, to have that version because he had such a sweet comment about it. And now because I dropped all my notes and they're not in order anymore, um, I can't find it. And it was so lovely. He called it The Story of the Little Boy and the Big Maid. Do you remember that, Matthew?
Yes, that's
I
right.
mentioned
Yeah,
that to you before we were recording. And why can't I find it now?
that's right. That's on a musical traditions release CD set
Oh, is it? Oh, good.
called Down by the Old Riverside.
Right.
And
Yes.
he
Yes.
sang that to Gwilym Davis in Gloucestershire on the 27th of November 1977. If
Oh,
people really want to know that sort of thing.
lovely.
But yeah, so the recording is available of that one of
Good.
Harry Brazill, and I'm sure that's in the
Very
notes for
sweet.
there.
Lovely. Oh, now, who was the singer that you had um, a note of that I actually didn't know?
Oh, you never heard of Jeff
Shame.
Wesley?
Jeff
A man called
Wesley.
Jeff Wesley. Jeff Wesley was is not was 'cause he's still alive and still singing. Is a farmer. He's not farming anymore. I think he's in his 80s, but
Right.
he's from Northamptonshire and he's a was a farmer. I think his son now runs the farm. And yeah, I've met him a couple of times, but over the years and heard him sing a lot, and he's just some of the sort of loveliest dulcet tones in a way.
Yes.
And he had a version on a CD which I do have
Yes.
a
And
copy
you
of, but I
said
can't
there were
remember.
20 tracks or so with some classic child ballads and lyrical songs and so on.
He had a, I know he had yeah, and but he had some more of those lyrical romantic songs like the Reed Cutter's Daughter and things like that. He
Yeah.
had that as well. So he had a nice sort of range of repertoire. Still has a
Yeah.
nice range of repertoire. And
I think it might be nice for people to hear that,
I think I
Matthew.
will play a bit of that.
I
Yeah,
mean, you played me a verse and I was enchanted with his singing.
yeah.
It's so sweet and
It's
intimate.
very, very
Um,
gentle, isn't it? And yeah, it's
so
lovely.
gentle. And Northamptonshire, let's face it, doesn't figure largely
It doesn't
in,
actually, no, that's quite
does it?
true.
Wouldn't that
Yeah,
be nice to hear? I'd like to hear it again, certainly.
absolutely.
Oh, not Harry Brazel, Nelson Penfold, The Tale of the Little Boy
Oh
and
yeah,
the
okay,
Big.
okay. So Harry Brazel, the recording of Harry Brazel does exist, and it's on that musical traditions thing. But
Yeah,
what you were referring to with that nice extra title was Nelson Penfold.
Penfold, who was actually recorded by Sam Richards and Tish Stubbs of Staverton Bridge. That would be back in the 70s, late 70s,
Yeah.
I think. And I'll try and get a recording of that because I don't know that that's been made available anywhere, Matthew. Has it?
There was a 1981 Folkways album called An English Folk Music Anthology that I think might even be on Spotify. But
Right.
there are recordings of people like Harry Stubbs and the recordings of the Grenoside Sword Dance on it and things. And
Oh, right.
but there's a couple of Nelson Penfold tracks in on a Traveller's
Ah,
section on the second
good.
LP and
It
things.
might only have been a fragment anyway. I'm not sure if it was the whole
Right.
song.
Well,
But
I'll
again,
keep an eye out for that one at some point.
yeah, I just thought it was such a sweet title, The Tale of the Little Boy and the Big Maid. Lovely,
That's
lovely.
very good. Yeah. There's other ones. We've got Bob Copper. Had it, which is an interesting one because there's a fantastic recording of Bob Copper singing it on a veteran release. Is it veteran or is it
Ah,
topic? It's
excellent.
veteran release.
Yes.
It's a veteran CD called "When the May Is All in Bloom,"
Yep.
um, which is traditional singing from the southeast of England, and it's six traditional singers. Bob Copper, John Copper, Louis Fuller, or Louis Sanders, depending on when she was recorded, Bob
Yeah.
Lewis, Ron Spicer, and my all time favourite, Gordon Hall.
Oh,
And there's a recording of Bob Copper on that, unaccompanied, singing The Trees That Do Grow High. However, before you come on to say what you're going to say, there is a recording of Bob Copper in the Roud Index. There's actually, if you go onto the entry for this particular version, because there'll be an entry for Bob Copper singing it on this veteran CD, but there is also an entry of a recording of Bob singing it at the Lewis Arms in Lewis in 1992,
oh, wow.
recorded by Jim Ward, and it's a recording of Bob singing it and accompanying himself on the concertina
No way.
because
Goodness.
he did play the English concertina a bit, and there's a recording of him accompanying himself singing it.
Goodness me. Got
He's
to hear
fantastic.
that.
I'll send you the link, and
Oh,
I will put the link in the show notes for this episode so people can hear it.
lovely.
But yeah, there is that. Now you have a thing about the Bob Copper version.
Oh, just to say, and you know exactly what I'm going to say. It's just that he was recorded by Seamus Ennis, and he heard Seamus sing the
Yeah.
version of the trees that do grow high, and it's it's Seamus Ennis's version,
Well, there we
which is
go.
interesting from all kinds of points of view, I think, because you kind of you we think of our source singers as hallowed, and they have this repertoire which is very personal or family or whatever, and of course that's such nonsense. If they were mixing with other musicians and singers, they were going to learn songs from them if they loved them.
Exactly. We had this discussion. We had this
Yeah.
discussion on an episode on our Patreon side.
Ah,
We did an episode on the song "Lovely Joan," and
right.
Vic Gammon came onto the history, and we had a long chat in that history half about what is a traditional singer and what makes all that sort of thing. What does it mean to be traditional? And because the only two source recordings we've got, source recordings, field recordings, are of
Yeah.
two singers of questionable sort of lineage. Because we've got Bob Lewis from Sussex,
Right.
who learnt the songs to his mother, but his mother learnt them out of a book. And
Well,
so
there you go.
there's also things. And the other singer, I think, was Ray Driscoll. And Ray Driscoll, actually, someone said, "Oh, where did you get that from for Lovely Joan?" And he said, "Well, I heard the tune in the Ray Vaughan Williams Fantasia orchestral piece, and I found the words in a folk song journal or something, and they put them together." So, it's traditional singers, in quotes, traditional singers learn things from wherever they wanted.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's really
Did
interesting. And so Bob Copper learned this, Seamus Ennis, yeah.
fantastic.
We're probably going to run out of time. We should probably skip a few of these, but I did want to mention May Bradley,
Yeah.
fabulous singer. There's a musical traditions CD which is 40 tracks of May Bradley singing.
Wow.
And track two is there, Longer Growing, and also track 30. There's two recordings of her singing
Wow.
this, but it's actually certainly the words for one of them. It's only two verses and quite fragmentary
Yeah.
and interesting. So I'm going to read this out.
Yeah.
Now the trees they do grow high, my love, but the leaves they do grow green. The time has gone and past, my love, that me and you have seen. It's normally you
Oh.
and I, but me and you is quite good. It's a cold and frosty night, my love, when me and you were sitting all alone, and we would let the ladies know that we were growing.
Goodness me.
This is
Hmm.
this is very interesting. And the second and final verse. Now I'll buy my wife a gown, sure the best of linen brown, and while she is a wearing it, the tears they will roll down, for she asked me for blue ribbons to tie around her bonny bonny waist, and then we'll let the ladies know that we are married. Now
Hmm.
where's that come from?
Hmm. Just a little kind of confused there.
Yeah.
I was going to say, do you think she's heard? Oh, this is entirely supposition. Do you think she's heard somebody sing it and thought, oh, that's lovely, and she's sung what she remembered of it?
Yeah, it's a lot I reckon it's a lot of misremembering and things
Yes,
in there,
but it's charming.
but it is charming. You come up with quite a nice version, and I'm sure you could, if you really wanted to, take that one and pad it out with
Yeah,
verses from elsewhere and make something out of it. I just want to bring up Marianne Haynes as well. It's always good to have Marianne Haynes.
absolutely. What a singer.
That's the recording of Marianne Haynes singing it on The Voice of the People. Tonight I'll Make You My Bride, Ballads of True and False Lovers, which I think Voice of the People Volume 6. And Marianne Haynes was a traveller, as I'm sure some people know. She was born in a caravan in Portsmouth in 1903, but ended up as a flower seller in Brighton
Yes.
and
Oh,
had a fantastically baffling way of singing. It was very sort of gypsy traveller influenced way of sliding between notes and things. And
I know. I mean, that is a voice full of experience, isn't it? And life.
yeah, and that's got a fabulous tune. That one. It's the oh the leaves they do. I can't remember which words. The
Yeah.
leaves they do grow, trees they do grow high, and the leaves they do grow green. The many's a winter's night, my love, that you and I have seen. It goes on like that. It's sort of a really
Wow.
weird, rambling minor sort of
Yeah.
modalish tune, which is
Wonderful.
fab. And then we won't go into them, but there are at least several other ones. We've got fragments of Harry Cox and Queen Carolyn Hughes. We've got Fred Jordan, George Dunn, Walter
Yeah.
Pardon, Stanley Robertson as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Got that.
nephew of Jeannie Robertson, and
Yes.
Voice of the People. One more Voice of the People one. From one of the later non-numbered editions, Good War People Take Warning, ballads sung by British and Irish traveller singers, traditional singers.
Yeah.
Margaret McGarvey, recorded by Seamus Ennis in County Fermanagh in
Oh,
1954.
yes, you played me a little of that earlier. It's beautiful, and it's totally related to the melody and the version that
Yeah,
Joe Heaney sings, except
absolutely.
she sings it in a beautiful kind of lilting 6/8 version, and he sings his in classic kind of Shanos free range
That's
kind
right.
of.
And Reg Hall wrote all the sleeve notes for these, and he talked a bit about I keep wanting to say George Burns. He was an actor. Robert Burns. Um,
Say goodnight, Gracie.
that's indeed yes. Robert Burns talking about Mary Ann. But he was saying that Burns' poem does not seem to have had much influence on the later development of the song. Other
Yeah,
short versions are printed by Scottish ballad collectors in the 1820s, but although these are clearly ancestors of Mary McGarvey's song, they are sufficiently different from the bulk of the traditional texts to suggest a different source or a radical
yeah,
rewriting at some point. And so,
yeah.
and interesting, Margaret McGarvey, We got the leaves they grew green and the trees they did grow tall, and many a happy hour I've spent, me and my love John. He's
Right.
named
He's
in this one.
named.
On a dark and stormy night, the winter does blow, blah, blah, blah. His age is 16 and I am 21. At the
There
age
we
of
go.
16, he was a married man. At the age of 17, he was a father of a son. At the age of 18, the grass grew over his grave. Cruel death put an end to his growing. And we made for him a shroud which was made of green and gold. And while she was making it, sure the tears they did downflow. Once I had a sweetheart, but now I have got none, and will rear up his son while he's growing.
Yeah,
So there you go. There's links to all sorts of different versions in that one. But there's far
absolutely.
too many versions for us to probably talk about, and we should end there because we've gone a little over the 1 hour mark. But
Um,
we'll see how it goes in the edit when I get this into the editing suite. But this has been really, really fascinating, this stuff, because as you said,
yeah,
there's a lot to unpick in
so
this
much
one.
to unpick. But with all of them, I guess, Matthew, not just this one, but
Oh no, but you
I
know,
think this is particularly so because of the implications of modern issues,
yeah,
like child marriage. I mean, you can't be off it really. That subject has to come up if we're at all interested in the ballads as something more than just kind of museum pieces that we observe and we unpick and so on until we've killed them. If we don't relate them to our lives and other people's lives so that they are living, breathing works of art,
yeah.
which have room for us to interpret them, then I don't know what we're about with them really.
No,
So if,
exactly, yeah.
if we've gone on alarmingly, we know that we could go on alarmingly for another 2 hours, couldn't we?
We could do, I think, for the sake of our listeners and the fact that if this was the only interview in the episode, we could have just talked a bit longer. But we are having a chat with Chris Foster later on for the second half of this,
Lovely.
I'm sure we'll discuss a lot of this stuff there as well. But yeah, thank you ever so much for coming back on and doing this. This has been
Enjoyed it
a pleasure.
enormously, Matthew. Thank you for having
Oh,
me.
that's quite all right. Well, we'll see you again. I'm sure this is your only appearance in this season, I think, unless anything drastically changes. But I know we've got you once in the next season coming up towards the end of this year. So we'll see you then, I'm sure. But for the meantime, Sandra Kerr, thank you very much. A huge thanks again to Sandra Kerr for providing us with the history of the trees they do grow high. As ever, in this, the halfway point of the episode, we're going to take a listen to a few different versions of this song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now are versions of The Trees They Do Grow High, sung by Bob Copper and Walter Pardon. Then 2 versions of Longer Growing from May Bradley and Marianne Haynes. The College Boy from Stanley Robertson. Young and Growing from Jeff Wesley. And Lady Mary Ann from Lizzie Higgins.
Oh, the trees they do grow high, and the leaves they do grow green. The time has long since passed, my love, that you and I have seen. 'Tis a cold and wintry night, my love, you and I must lie alone. For my bonny boy is young, but he's growing. Oh, father, dearest father, you've done to me great harm. You've married me to a bonny boy, and you know he's far too young. Oh, daughter, dearest daughter, just you bide along with me, and a lady you shall be while he's growing.
The trees they do grow high, the leaves they do grow green. The time is long past, love, you and I have seen. It's a cold winter's night when you and I must bide alone. Though my bonny lady's young, he's a growing, growing. though my bonny lady's young, he's a growing. Oh, Father, dear Father, you've done me much wrong. You married me to a boy who I fear is too young. Oh, daughter, dear daughter, if you stay at home with me, a lady you shall be while he's growing, growing. A lady you shall be while he's growing.
Now the trees they do grow high, my love, but the leaves they do grow green. The time has gone and past, my love, that me and you have seen. It's a cold and a frosty night, my love, when me and you are sitting all alone. And we would let the ladies know that we are growing. Now I'll buy my wife a gown, sure the best of linen brown. And while she is wearing it, but the tears they will roll down. For she has to me for blue ribbons to tie around her bonny ways. And then we'll let those ladies know that we are married.
Oh, the trees, they did grow high, and the leaves, they did grow green. These years have gone in past, my love, what you and I have seen. Many a cold and winter's night, you and I have laid alone. But our bonny boy is young, and he's growing. Oh, Father, dearest Father, near to me much harm you have done. You have married me to a young youth, you knew we were too young. Oh, daughter, dearest daughter, if you'll only wait for a while, I will send him to a college while he's growing.
Oh, Father, dear Father, pray what's this you've done? You've wed me to a bonny boy, a boy who's far too young. He is scarcely 16 years, and I am 21. He's a bonny, bonny boy, but he's growing. Oh, Father, dear Father, I know what I will do. I will send him off to the college for another year or two. I will tie around his arm a ribbon made of blue, for to let the people know that he's married.
And the leaves they do grow green, the trees they do grow tall, and many a happy hour I spend along my love John. And it's many a long and winter's night that I must lie alone. Oh, the bonny boy is young, and he's a growing. Oh, Father, my dear Father, I think you did do wrong to go and get me married to a boy who is too young. For he's just 16 years of age, and I am 21. Oh, the bonny boy is young, and he's a growing.
Lady Mary Ann looked out the castle walk when she saw three bonny laddies a playing at a bar, and the youngest he was the floor among them all. He's my bonny, bonny boy, I am growing no. Father, dear father, I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll send him to the college for another year or two, and round about his cup I will sew the ribbons blue, for to let the ladies know that he's growing no.
And you can find links to those tracks and the albums they're from, or as many of them as I can find, in the episode notes. On to the second half of this episode. I spoke with singer and guitarist Chris Foster, and we chatted about his history with folk music, his 2017 solo album Hadolin, which features on it his version called The Trees They Grow So High. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, Chris Foster. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So good to see you and to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
Good. Very glad. How are you? How's things?
Fine, busy as usual, but yeah, fine.
Good. And yes, you're in. It's an hour earlier for you, isn't it? Because you live in Iceland, and so
yeah, I'm in not very sunny today, Reykjavik, but we've just been having a heat wave, which kind of petered out yesterday. So there's been record-breaking temperatures going on all over the country. It was actually warmer in the East Fjords at the weekend than it was in Madrid.
Wow, blimey, that's startling, isn't it? Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, so it's slightly earlier in the day for you than it is for me at the moment.
But not that early.
Not that early. It's fine. Yes, and our good memories of Reykjavik. I mean, you booked me for a music festival in.
Yeah, and we still talk about you singing Under the Sea as we went under the sea through the tunnel.
That's right. He drove us under a fjord and he said, Matt, sing Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid. So only too happy to oblige. Little did I know that years later I would actually be in the live action version of The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, right.
Playing the concertina. But that was never in a million years thought that would happen. But that's life.
Yeah.
But yes, you booked me for you were running a folk festival in Akureyri.
Yeah, that's right. We still run the festival, but it's now in Reykjavik, and it'll be in September. 10th anniversary this year, but we won't be hitting the 10th festival because of COVID. But
of course, yeah. That's right, and that's where I first met. We had them on the Patreon about a month or two ago. Paul Wilson and Marilyn Tucker.
Yeah.
They came on to talk about song collecting in Devon, and that was when I met them at Reykjavik Airport about 10 p.m. that night. We all got there, and you picked us up. That was lovely, and that was a fantastic, I remember people saying uncharacteristically sunny week.
Yeah,
that was May of 2018, I think, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And a wonderful time was had.
Yeah.
Well, when I ran out of money halfway through the week, Paul and Marilyn had to buy me dinners for the rest of the week. You did warn me that Iceland was very expensive.
Yeah, I mean it is, but it hits foreign visitors harder than it does us because here our incomes are kind of more in balance with the prices.
Sure, of course, yeah.
But then people coming from the UK find it hard to believe that a meal can cost the same as two meals in England.
Indeed, as I found out to my cost, as it were.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
that was a fantastic week. You had us over from England, and you had some people from Finland as well, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
That was
Anna
astonishing.
Felt, who also knew all the words of Under the Sea.
Anna Felt, yes, I'm still in contact with her. Just about she came over to England and played at the Brighton Festival, and I was already living in Sheffield by then, and I
Yeah,
couldn't go and see her. But yeah,
yeah,
we the occasional contact still.
yeah.
But yeah, met some fantastic people, and I've still got an album by. This is we're wildly off topic here, but there was that accordion player,
Matty Callio,
Matti Kallio,
good friend,
who was
lives just round the
fabulous.
corner.
Does he? Excellent.
Yeah,
And the guitarist and mandolin player that came with him,
yeah,
Petri Hakala,
yeah,
gave me his CD, which
yeah.
I've almost been on constant repeat since 2018.
Right.
I've never heard of him since.
Yeah, yeah.
And I gave him a CD of mine, but I doubt he'd be interested in it particularly. But it was all like end of the week. Here, have a CD. Lovely to meet
Yeah,
you.
right. Yeah, you give your CDs away because you don't want to carry them home, but then you get ones in return, so you still end up carrying CDs home.
Exactly. Yes, that was yes. It didn't quite work out that way, but that was a wonderful week. That was of 24-hour sunlight.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was my holiday and my working holiday in Iceland aside. We are here today, as people have know because we're listening to the episode, to talk about the song Roud 31, "The Trees They Do Grow High." But before we get into the song, then give us a bit of Chris Foster history. Tell us a bit about yourself and your sort of musical upbringing, if there was one, and your sort of history with folk music. Did you just discover folk music, or did you have folk music thrust upon you, or what's the story there, Chris Foster?
Right. Well, basically, I guess you could say that my introduction was kind of twofold. On the one hand, we sang folk songs at primary school. I remember there was one called Sweet Polly Oliver, and I think it may have been a Cecil Sharp, book for schools or something that
Oh
was
well,
used.
that was very well widely circulated.
Yeah,
That book.
so we had that. And then my parents were both involved in folk dancing, and my dad got involved in Morris dancing. That was like in the 1950s. Um, and so I got dragged along to all kinds of events. Um, and I think I seem to remember that I would not be very old at the time, but I think I seem to remember that we went to one of the very early Sidmouth folk festivals because, I was growing up in Yeovil, which is not very far from Sidmouth.
Oh yeah.
Um,
So
and
Sidmouth started in 1954, I think.
That's right, yeah, because it was the 70th anniversary last year.
Indeed, and I was there at the 50th Jubilee year as
And
well.
we, in fact, met along the pavement outside the Arts Centre.
Last year we did indeed. That's right.
Yeah, but yeah, so I was sort of had that. And then basically through the folk dancing side of things, I knew the Yetis, who were initially a folk dance band,
Right.
Yetminster being just outside of Yeovil. And then in 64, April of 64, they started the Yeovil Folk Club. And because I knew them, I thought, oh, that might be fun. So I went along. And I discovered that the first week I went there, I discovered that if you sang, you got in for free. And so the next time I went, I sang a song because I'd been at a weekend kind of residential thing. I remember it was in a kind of holiday camp on the North Somerset coast, and they'd been there, and there was we were kind of had a bit of a tune-up basically one evening I remember, but also there was it was EFDSS run thing. They had development workers in those days. And I bought an EP, my first folk recording that I ever bought, and it was an EP by Cyril Tawney. And so that was a year earlier, actually. That was in 63. And I learnt the songs on, well, most of the songs on this EP. There was three, one side, two, the other side. And the first one I ever learnt was his version of The Wild Rover. And so I went along to the folk club in springtime of 64 and I got in free because I sang The Wild Rover. And then I went the next time and I sang The Wild Rover again. And I thought this is getting a bit embarrassing. I need to find some more material. And so I learned another song off the EP. And then I got a book with songs in. Um, EFDSS produced thing, and I learned some songs from that. I remember there was one called "The Watch It Sailor," and I kind of liked the idea that these songs kind of connected with places that I knew, and and it was sort of, and obviously, growing up and living in Somerset, I was kind of aware quite early on that there'd been a lot of songs that had been collected by this geezer called Cecil Sharp from local places that I knew well. And it seemed like they were kind of my songs in a way. And so, that was basically where I started. And I really liked the folk club and I liked all that kind of singing choruses together lustily and all that kind of business. And the other thing was that at that time, the folk scene was kind of beginning and it was a youth movement, the people organizing folk clubs and stuff were in their late teens, early 20s.
Right,
And
yeah.
and the people going were of a similar age, and it was informal. It could include a bit of underage drinking, if the landlords of the pubs where these clubs were held were not too fussy about checking people's ages. Um, and it was just, convivial and fun. And Yeovil Folk Club was actually, I think, looking back on it, it was actually very good. And the Yetis, were very good at kind of finding out what was going on. There was a kind of network of clubs around the southwest, so performers could come and do a series of gigs through a week. So they would do the Jolly Porter in Exeter, and then there was a club in Dorchester, I think, and there was one in Plymouth, and so Cyril Tawney was doing stuff down in Plymouth at that time, and so we got all kinds of people coming there very early on, and I remember Louis Killen came. That was the first time I probably saw somebody playing a concertina, and I thought his singing was amazing. But we also had people like Julie Felix, um, and Bob Davenport, Nigel Denver, Tony Rose used to come up from Exeter,
Right, yeah.
and so on. So, and Martin Carthy came, and then when he got together with Dave Swarbrick, he came too. And they used to have also, they used to always put a pre-Sidmouth Ceilidh on the Friday before Sidmouth started on the Saturday. So we get all these kind of people from way up the country. I remember there was one where we had the high level ranters there and, from the other end of England kind of thing. So a lot of people came past us. And I remember in 1966, it was probably, Paul Simon was a guest.
Wow.
And because he was living in London at the time and he did a circuit of the Southwest. And he, there's a funny story with that. He arrived at the club and the girl that was on the door said, uh, that'll be two and six, um, 12.5p in today's money. And he said, "No, I'm playing. You don't understand. I'm playing here tonight." And she said, "No, you don't understand. It's 2 and 6. And if you do play, we'll give you your money back."
Oh, I see. You get the money back if you perform.
And
Oh dear.
and so on. But yeah, and I mean that was just before the Paul Simon Songbook album was released. So that was like pre Simon and Garfunkel and all of that. And
Wow.
it was obvious that he was extremely good and so on. So, I mean, I saw a lot of people. And of course, I was listening then to all the same kind of recordings that other people were listening to. Listened to all the stuff that was coming out of Greenwich Village and so on. And the likes of Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. I was never a big fan of Joan Baez. I sort of thought her voice was not particularly earthy. um, but other people obviously loved that. But yeah, and I was listening also to kind of blues, a lot of blues artists, and me and my mates, we used to hitchhike up to Bristol where we would see the blues package tours that came over from the States.
All right.
It's an annual thing. So, I saw people like Howlin' Wolf and all of that ilk and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. And I sort of had a go at playing some of that stuff or singing that stuff. And I thought it was faintly ridiculous, this sort of white teenager from Yeovil kind of singing songs that were coming from kind of old black guys from Mississippi. It sort of didn't fit quite like singing the Watch It Sailor, let's say that.
Well,
And
indeed.
uh, and I started out, I was in a duo with my mate from school. He played a guitar. He was a decent singer as well. So he played the guitar and then we both sang. And then I thought, well, I think I could play the guitar. So I sold the clarinet, which I was not particularly enjoying
Oh,
learning, and bought a guitar and started playing the guitar. And so just sort of carried on really. And then quite quickly really started singing English songs pretty much exclusively because they were the ones that seemed to suit me. Um, and I liked the stories and so on. And then I
and
just carried on
and the
and then
rest is history.
well yeah, and then I went to art school um and sort of was doing the odd gig while I was at art school and then when I left art school I became a professional folk musician overnight. It was because I did postgraduate studies in London at Chelsea School of Art, and I moved to London. I already knew John Kirkpatrick, and um, he and his band had started a Cayley club at the Roebuck on Tottenham Court Road, and so I went straight there um, because there was somebody there doing the thing I like doing that I knew. And it kind of more or less, as I arrived, he and Sue moved up to Shropshire, and then I kind of stepped in with my then partner and Sheila Miller, and we sort of took over the reins of running the club with Roger Holt, who was the drummer in John's band, who didn't move out of town, and that was the Dingles Folk Club, and that would have been
Ah,
early 70s. So I arrived in London in 71, September 71, and it was a really good club, and it was unique in that we always had dancing at the beginning of the night before the sort of rest of the evening, kind of typical folk club type thing. And we we had to move from the Roebuck because the structural engineers said that the floor of the upstairs room, function room, couldn't take the amount of punishment it was getting from the Cayley dancing.
oh,
So we moved around the corner to the Adams Arms in Conway Street. And the other thing was that at the time when I was doing that, of course, I was being the sort of doing a residency, as they call it. And we were booking, a who's who of the people going around at the time. And so I got to meet a lot of performers from all over the place, people like Dave Burland, I remember, I got to know then at that time, Alistair Anderson and so on. And so I made contacts and friends that way. But also there was one evening I remember we had Sean Cannon, who at that time was living in Coventry as a solo performer, and Jean Oglesby came down to see him, and because she was signing up people to be on her agency, and so and Sarah Gray was driving Sean around, and so Jean got to hear Sarah and me as well that evening. And at the end of the evening, she came to me and said, "I'm starting this agency. Would you like to be on the books?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" kind of thing. And so when I finished art school, um, there was, some people around the country had seen me. Jean had me on her books, and I was like the last one on the list because nobody really had ever heard of me. And so, kind of the first year or so, I was the one who got sent out when somebody else got sick or couldn't make a gig or something. So
Right,
I
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of depped my way around the country and fortunately got return gigs off the back of that. And the other thing was that in those days, they had this thing called the Professional and Executive Register, which meant that if you came out as a graduate from whatever education, they couldn't make you take a job that, or yeah, they couldn't make you take a job that was not something you could do with your degree.
Right.
So, you couldn't be made to go and, I don't know, take a cliche, sweep the streets if you had a fine art degree. You could use a brush for painting, but not for sweeping the streets. And
Right.
and so basically that I could sign on because they couldn't find me a job as an artist, and I could go off and do gigs in the meantime. I just had to sign on at the job centre every week, and sometimes that involved kind of hairy drives back from other parts of the country to be there on time. But that's how I survived the first few months, and then gradually I started to get my own gigs, and just went on from there. So that's basically my start.
Great. Fantastic. Moving into this song then, today's song, The Trees They Do Grow High. Where does this song come in? Not necessarily the version that we're going to hear later, but where does this song in general sort of turn up for you in your folk consciousness?
I can tell you exactly where it comes from. It's track 2 on Martin Carthy's first album, the one where he's hanging on a pallet from a crane on the cover.
That's
on the,
right. It's
on the
yeah.
Fontana label, released in 1965. So it's actually the 60th anniversary of me first hearing this song this year.
So it is. So it is
yeah.
indeed.
And it was one of the songs on the record. It was one of the ones that I instantly kind of liked. And of course, on that one, there's a kind of chorus, there's or repeat of the end of the verse type thing. And I like the song, I like the tune, and I like the story, and so it's been kind of in my consciousness ever since, really. And of course, loads of versions of it have come past me. It's kind of just part of the kind of soup of songs that is always around.
Sure. And so when was this a song that you were performing a lot back then, or was, because I know this is on your album Hadelin from 2017, I think.
Yeah.
Was this a song that you were performing a lot before then, or was this something for the album, or were you singing this a lot in the 60s, 70s, and that sort of thing as well?
Right. I might have learned it when off of the album, like in the 1960s. I can't really remember, to be honest. But basically, it's never really been part of my repertoire when I became like Chris Foster, traveling around being a folk musician. um, and and partly because so many other people did it, and I was always trying to find either versions of songs that were different from the versions that were around, or um, songs that were just not being sung by anybody else. Um, and it wasn't particularly trying to be distinctive. I just thought it was interesting to find different stuff.
Sure.
And so I never ever did really sing it. And um, and then basically I made a version of it because I was doing the Hadolin album that you mentioned, and that has a kind of lot of trees on the album, and it's sort of stuff to do with seasons and also kind of rotation of the seasons and kind of birth and death and all that kind of stuff. And trees are a feature kind of highly in that annual cycle stuff for obvious reasons. And I thought, I'd sort of toyed with the idea on and off over the years, and maybe I should, do a version of it. Because, like, partly you get into this thing where you think, there are these sort of classic songs, you know, like Cruel Mother and Lord Bateman and this, and, you don't sing them for a long time because everybody else does them. But then you think, I really should see what I can do with this song, kind of thing.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And so then basically I thought, maybe Tuesday Goes to High would be a good thing to have on the album because it was a perfect fit with all the other songs there. So basically doing the album and putting together a sort of set list for the album became the kind of reason for doing the song. And then of course I had to have a version of the song to sing, and so I kind of did the classic kind of collage song making process.
Right, I was about to ask whether this was a hodgepodge, as it were, or whether this was already a complete version.
No, it's definitely not a complete version. I basically I actually it's a sort of, I mean, for a long, long time, like until I was well into my 40s, I never messed with songs in the sense that, I mean, I would arrange them, but I never messed with them in the sense of thinking that I could make something up or do rewrites or anything like that. I didn't feel I had the right to. And then I started to think, well, I've been doing this long enough now. I think I know enough about what it is that I can kind of do stuff with this.
Yeah.
And so I then sort of over the last 20 plus years, I've, felt okay about messing about with things. And so what I did for the Trees They Grow So High, I I actually just went on to the EFDSS website and I scrolled through notebook versions of the song, discovered that actually a lot of versions were collected, dotted all over Somerset.
Right.
Um, and I copied them all down. And then I had a look at Baring Gould because I've always had a strong connection with the Baring Gould stuff, and so on, and one or two other bits and pieces. And I made this long list of versions, and I did, and in the case of like Cecil Sharp stuff, it was like penciled notations of the tunes as well. And so I literally kind of compiled the text from snippets taken from a bunch of different Somerset recordings, particularly Somerset, not recordings, Somerset collections from Cecil Sharp primarily. And I did the same with the tune. I mean, I literally took phrases from different singers' tunes and wove them into a tune, the tune that I use. And the there was one singer Um, I got the list in front of me here actually. But where are we at? So, oh, come on. Yeah, so there's like I got one, two, three. Yeah, there's about 10 or 12 versions I sort of kept. And there was this one from a guy in Bridgewater called Jack Barnard. And he sings this line, she made for him a shroud of the Hadelin so fine.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And so I thought, well, that's interesting. I've never seen that word used in this song before. Got to have that.
Yes, because you get a lot, you get Holland a lot, don't you? Because there's the Marianne Haynes one in particular is the one that I noticed it in, which I mentioned with Sandra earlier. The song "Longer Growing."
Hmm.
I'm going to make my love a shroud. Although Marianne Haynes sang Stroud, which
Yes.
must just be a mistake.
Well, it is a kind of textile town, you know.
Oh well, you. I wonder if that. Yes, I wonder if she knew that. I don't know. But I'm going to make my love a shroud of the best of Holland's brown, and so I
Yeah,
think that's a common one, isn't it? Holland brown, or the
yeah,
and
yeah,
brown. Yeah, Walter Pardon had. I made my love a shroud of the Holland oh so fine.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but Hadelin, that's an
Yeah,
unusual one.
and there's a whole little story around that because obviously, I couldn't resist using Hadelin.
Yeah.
And who knows what Hadelin is? It fits the melody perfectly, having three syllables instead of two. Um,
Yeah.
and I thought, yeah, obviously it's a corruption of Holland, I would think. Um,
I think somewhere, yeah, it's somewhere along the way. It's in the evolving tradition. It's kind of transformed into
yeah,
Hadelin, probably. Yeah.
absolutely. But the thing is that it's a lovely word. It's a lovely word to sing. Um, but there's a little kind of side story there because I was doing this song in a concert and it was where where somebody was like introducing, I was singing in a concert with a load of other things. And there was a kind of compare introducing the performers and I was doing this song and no, actually I wasn't doing this song. I was doing something else, but he kind of did some background research and discovered that I had this album called Hadelin and then went on a kind of word search for Hadelin.
Right.
And he discovered, because he kind of just like Googled it, that there was a Saint Hadelin
Oh.
who
Okay.
was in Holland, I think, or Belgium or somewhere in Northern Europe, anyhow, back in the day. And and then the weird thing was that it turned out that his Saint's Day was like almost the same day in the year as the release date of my album, which is called Hadelin. And the reason the album's called Hadelin, I thought no other person is going to have an album called Hadelin because it's just not on their radar.
Yeah.
Because I did have an album a while ago called Traces, and of course Kareem Power did the Traces album as well. So I thought, and I like one word titles, and so it's a kind of curious word. Nobody knows what the hell it means. It was like a no-brainer to choose it, really.
Indeed. I've just looked up a quick Google search. Saint Hadelin. We don't know, born but died around the year 690
Yeah,
AD, and was one of the scholarly monks. I mean, this is Wikipedia I'm quoting now. Was one of the scholarly monks who preached Christianity and started conversion work in what is now Belgium.
yeah. There you go.
So there you go. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
yeah. But I don't think Jack Barnard knew about him.
No, so yeah, I mean, there's now a Scottish knitwear family run knitwear business called something Hadelin in the Scottish borders. I don't nothing to do with that either, but that's a nice connection, knitwear and linen and stuff. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But one of the things about these songs that I really like and why I like getting songs, I mean, I might be mauling them around, but I like going back to these kinds of sources for mauling material, is that you get these strange kind of verbal things. And I know from my own singing, sometimes I sing words that I've never heard before. They just come out mixed up kind of thing.
yeah,
And And I just like that kind of thing. It kind of adds a little air of mystery as well to the sort of text, if anybody's bothering to listen. And and then you get this sort of, I love the kind of vernacular language in these songs that you know you don't get in art music in the same way. So like there's a couplet that kicks off the last verse. I don't remember. I think it came from a woman in Curry Rival, and but it goes, "And now my love is dead, and in the churchyard laid, the green grass it grows over him, so very, very thick."
Oh,
Tells you exactly what you need to know
yeah.
in a very unpoetic kind of way. But I mean, it's to me that's really kind of charming, and it
What was the what was the word at the end of the first line? Is there an obvious rhyme
yeah.
that they avoided? What
Yeah.
was it again?
So basically, well, the thing is, they were caught. So they did the end of the first. In many versions, the verse goes, "Now my love is dead, and in his grave does lie. The green grass it grows over him, so very, very."
Hi. Indeed, yes.
But you know, I like singing. Now my love is dead, and in the churchyard laid, the green grass it grows over him, so very, very thick.
Yeah, that's good. I love that. I love that's one of the things I really love is that kind of almost deliberate non-rhyming thing where there is an obvious rhyme, but they've chosen with someone else. There's a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fantastic recording of Suffolk singer Jumbo Brightwell, I think it
Oh yeah,
was.
I knew him well when I lived in Suffolk. He was my neighbour, and we spent many hours together.
Oh wow! And there's a I can't remember which song it is, but there's a song he had where he sang something like, "She went down to the town for a fresh suit of clothes and dressed herself down from her head to her feet." And I just thought that's so good.
Yeah,
And it's if it would be very easy, and I'd have to say rather boring to change feet to toes so that it
absolutely.
rhymes. And sorry, my favourite one I've heard is I've told this on the podcast before. Percy Ling sing it, and
Also from the
oh,
same.
that's right. And he had a song that my dad sang from Percy Ling, the crabfish, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know the crabfish, the lobster, all that,
yeah.
which will turn up on the podcast in a couple of years, I think.
Mhm.
Um, he had a line. Percy Ling had the line, yes, sir, I have two. One is for you, and the other is for me."
Yeah, yeah. I heard him sing it many, many
Yeah,
times,
and
and
I
in
just
fact,
think
I
I think
learned
that's
that song, and I
wonderful.
still keep that.
Do you? Excellent. I just think that's wonderful. I just
Yeah.
don't change the idiosyncrasies. I mean, all for adapting things and doing what you want, but I don't like the ironing out of the odd stuff.
No, but the other
Yeah.
thing about Percy was, I mean, Percy was a real comedian
Oh,
and
okay.
a hell of a performer, and it was a very deliberate choice, and
Also,
he kind of
okay.
almost waited for the laughter.
Well, it works for me as well,
Yeah, yeah,
so that's fine.
yeah. I mean, he was
But then
gold.
you
That
McCall wrote "Dirty Old Town." There isn't a single rhyme in it, so
yeah, yeah,
you
man.
don't. I'm not personally. I'm not constricted by the idea that it all has to rhyme.
No,
It's
no,
whatever
not at all.
suits the story.
Yeah, not at all.
Anyway, so that's a good line. The grows so thick. That's really good. I like that.
Yeah.
That's very good. So yeah, what was there anything about this? I don't know if you haven't answered this, but what is it about this song that drew you to it? Apart from the sort of Hadelin thing, was there anything? This I discussed this subject matter with Sandra, all about the whole idea of this arranged marriage
Yeah.
and the seasons and things. What was it for you about this?
Well, I think it's a strange kind of mixture, and the more you kind of really look at it, um, in many versions, the more kind of odd it becomes. Um, but it has this kind of trajectory where, despite the kind of oddities, it kind of makes a narrative sense in its own right.
Yeah,
Um, and I've never really bothered too much about kind of picking it apart too much. Um,
sure.
I mean, ever in the way I've listened to it over the years from different people, but also when it came to actually putting the song together and performing it. Um, and it's interesting as well because obviously when I first heard the song, I was a teenager. I was interested in social history. So, um, the idea of uh, an arranged marriage was something that was kind of interesting to me, thinking, "Ooh, I'm glad it's not like that now," as a teenager.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was kind of odd that this father had chosen a boy, you know. But I would have taken that at face value. Well, I did that kind of weird stuff in those days.
Well, this is the thing.
And
I hadn't. I mean, I understood the concept of arranged marriage, and I knew that that was what this song was about. But I until Sandra pointed it out in the first half of this episode, I just hadn't really taken on board the odd fact that it's a young boy and an older woman rather than the standard way round.
yeah,
You
I
know.
mean, I never really sort of stopped to think about that, quite honestly. I just thought it was the main thing that struck me, and I guess that was, as a teenager, was the idea that your father could actually, you know, do this kind of thing.
Well, yes,
Um, and so there was that element, that was just like, I'm singing this now and we don't do this anymore. It's weird they did it back in their days kind of thing.
sure.
And then of course there's the kind of tragedy bit in the middle, like this marriage is set up, but it doesn't last very long
Yeah.
because the boy dies. Um, while he's still a teenager, and then she's left a widow um, with a child to bring up. And I never stopped to think about the implications of somebody being, so she say she's getting married like when he's 16, she's
Yes.
21 in my
Some
version.
versions he's 16 and then dies at 18. I
Yeah,
think
that's mine
I
is like
think
that.
I think Mary Ann Haynes' one was, I think he was 20 and then 21 when he dies. It's a little bit older, but I mean
Yeah.
the ages vary from singer to singer
Yeah, but I
sometimes.
mean, basically, it's over a period of a couple of years. So if
Yeah.
she say she's 21 when she's complaining about the arranged marriage, she's still like in her mid 20s when he dies. So, I never stopped to think about the kind of historical stuff to do with how would a young woman in her mid 20s with a widow in her mid 20s with
A single mother,
a
yeah.
child, how would she what would her future be kind of thing. I never really thought about that at all. I was just kind of sorry for her because she was in the shit. And and
Indeed,
um
indeed.
and then I kind of really kind of what's the word? I really empathized with her sense of loss as it's expressed in the song.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's kind of weird as well because, the song starts off, the version I do is like many, many others. It starts off with her speak, and it's sung in the first person. It's got the classic trees they grow so high kind of opening line. And she's, it's a cold wind in a winter's night and I'm all alone stuff. And then you get this sort of story bit, Father dear, oh Father, how could you do this to me? Da 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 da. And then he has the perfect reply, which is, when I'm old and in my grave, he'll be a man. And it's like he will be able to look after you when I'm no longer able to.
Right.
And a way that it's changed, the song has changed for me, and I've, now I'm an old git. I kind of can see things. I see things from a different perspective. So now, because I have a daughter, you know her, Amy.
Yeah.
Um, um, I can kind of put myself in his position, thinking about talking to a daughter, which I could never do as a teenage boy. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
so, you get different perspectives over time. Um, and
Yes, I could relate that to a as it's only taken 43 minutes for me to mention a film. It's so usually quicker than that. There's a story about Steven Spielberg writing and directing Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Yeah.
and he said that he didn't have any children when he wrote that, and he said that had he wrote that 5 years later, he would have changed the ending. He would have, because the film ends with Richard Dreyfuss's character going onto the alien. Spoiler alert for a film made in the 70s.
Yeah.
It ends with Richard Dreyfuss going onto the spaceship and being and of his own free will and going away with the aliens to whatever,
Yeah.
and leaving his wife and 2 kids behind. And Steven Spielberg said that had he written that film 5-10 years later when he had kids, he would not have written it so that the father leaves his family behind.
Yeah, right.
He would have stayed. So I think becoming a parent does, change a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting
you know.
factoid. I first saw that film at the Oldborough Cinema when I was living in Suffolk and hanging out with the likes of Jumbo and Percy.
There we
But
go.
there you
There we go. Anyway,
so there are different kind of bits in the song. So, and it's kind of a bit unusual in a way because the first part of the song is a conversation, and it's so she's talking first person, and then the father replies talking first person, and he's obviously fond of his daughter in the way it comes across. He's concerned about her future well-being, and then it's like and in addition, I'll send him off to college, with the blue ribbons and all that bit. And then perhaps in time, my love, he will do for you. So it's like trying to kind of soften the sort of the deal. And then you get the sort of sequence to the end, and it goes into third person. At the age of 16, he was a married man, blah, blah, blah. And she made for him. It's not like she doesn't sing, I'm making him a shroud of the Holland Sapphire. She made for him a Holland of the Hadelin Sapphire, and every stitch she put in it, her tears come trickling down. So she's obviously sad to lose him now. And then in the end, he's lying in the church with the grass over him so very thick. And I will sit here and mourn his death until the day I die, and I'll keep watch over his son while he's growing. And so it kind of shifts perspectives and kind of feel as you go through this sort of trajectory of the story. And it kind of covers lots of different kind of emotional bases at different points. But the other thing which came up, I listened to the conversation you had with Sandra, the thing about, attitudes to death. People dying young was a much more common occurrence back in
of course,
days. And I'm talking about the time of the source singers, like people who were written down from by Sharp in the early 20th century had a very, very different perspective on life expectancy.
And a lot of child mortality and that sort of thing. It was
absolutely.
Completely different to today,
Absolutely. My parents were born, my dad was born 1918 and my mum in 20. And he was the oldest of 3, and they all survived. My mum was the youngest of 7, of which only 5 survived to adulthood.
Right.
She had her oldest sister had a daughter who died of diphtheria in the 1930s. There was like all along the line in those days, people had much bigger birth rate and correspondingly larger death rate because they didn't have, there was nothing they could do about it, basically, especially working people. And especially people, living in rural areas. And it was just part and parcel of the deal, basically. So I think maybe part of what made the song popular was this kind of thing of people identifying with the kind of randomness of life events and the randomness of mortality.
I mean, the song never states, pretty much no version states why he died.
No.
And so it just did,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my version, it just says he did it suddenly. It doesn't say what he died of, but it does kind of it does kind of imply that there wasn't a lingering death from cancer or something. But you know,
Yeah. But I think I was thinking about this and looking through various texts of this song and thinking that it just seems something about it's always struck me as a bit off in terms of her attitude towards this young woman, her attitude towards the boy that she has been, forced to marry, in that she's always basically essentially sort of moaning, almost saying, "Father, you've done me great wrong.
yeah,
You've married me to a boy I fear he is too young." So it doesn't. She never actually states that she loves him, regardless of the fact that he's too young, even though she's complaining he's too young. But then, I mean, you were saying that your version, it's she made the lover's shroud, isn't it? Or and they made
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
But
absolutely.
a lot of traditional singer versions, I've found it is they do have the first person one. I'm going to make my lover's shroud, and that sort of thing. That does turn up,
Yeah.
and so somehow by the time he's died, she does love him, even though
Yeah,
he's
I
too
mean, and I
young.
think that that doesn't mean that there were, if it was, I mean, there are elements in the story which kind of don't quite add up, and you have to remember that it is a story and that it is a
Oh
song that
yes,
has been
and then she
gone
she
through
she,
multiple versions.
she moaned that he's too young, so we'll send him to college,
Yeah,
and then he's away at college because he's too young for her.
yeah,
And then by the time he dies, she's already had a son by him. So
yeah.
she
I mean,
must have
it
had a
does
son by
it.
him whilst he was too young. It's something a bit
Yeah, I
weird
mean,
about the
if you really
chronology.
want to do a forensic kind of breakdown, it does. It's a load of bollocks, basically.
There is something off about the chronology somehow, isn't
Yeah,
there? But
absolutely.
nevertheless, there's a thing. Well, the film thing. Mark Kermode, the film critic, always says this about people who moan about film biopics that deviate from factual stuff. Like, and a few people moaning about the film about Bob Dylan, a complete unknown, saying,
Yeah, yeah,
"Well, that didn't happen like that," and that and all that. And Malcolm had always said, "Just because it happened in real life doesn't make it good storytelling."
yeah. Right.
And the same, I think, applies to songs, whether they're about real events, like some people believe this song to be, or not. Just
Yeah.
because it happened or happens like real life doesn't make it good storytelling.
No, and I think the other thing is that, the song kind of starts from somewhere we don't know. There may have been a real young person who died at some point. Well, we know there were millions of them, but
Yeah,
somebody had the idea of making up a song and something made them want to do it.
yeah,
And beyond that,
absolutely.
we don't really know anything. But the thing is that in the version that I sing, which it doesn't really stray any distance at all from the kind of classic kind of storyline. So in my version, she says, Father dear, oh Father, you've done me cruel wrong. I love that expression. You've done me cruel wrong.
Yeah,
You've married me
yeah,
to a boy, and I think he is too young, for he is only 16 years while I am 21. Looking at it now, even for you, like in your mid 30s, 21 don't look so old. But when you're 21, a 16-year-old is a baby, It's like perceptions of age difference are very different. And so to the father, a difference in age of 5 years, it's nothing.
but when you're that young, it's a when you become an adult, the idea of being married to or in a relationship with someone who is of a wider age difference, it's not so much of an issue. Whereas when you're a teenager and the early 20s, that's like an entirely different generation of people.
Yeah, yeah.
But as soon as we all become like adults, the gap, the mental gap, I suppose, is a lot less.
Well, it
And so
shrinks as you get older.
yeah,
It's
so
about
there's a whole
percentages.
quite so there's a whole age. Yeah, it's anyway. Yes, there is that to consider as well, I guess,
Yeah.
from his
But,
perspective and the daughter's.
so the thing is that, she's moaning because he's married her off to this boy and that boy is too young. Um, and
Yeah,
then the father so explains kindly, it's not like you're going to marry him whether or no, so shut up kind of thing. It's like, well, when I'm old and gone, then you'll have somebody to take care of you. And then he goes on with, and and I'll send him off to college. So it's obviously, this is somebody, you know, ordinary working people in Somerset, agricultural workers and whatever, or even Jack Barnard living in the town of Bridgewater, they didn't have anybody they knew who was sent off to college. But they could
Right.
quite happily sing about, I'll send him off to college for another year or two. So this is somebody who's got some serious cash. And
Indeed.
there's this weird image of the blue ribbons. I mean, where the hell does that come from?
Well, as Sandra and I said, we couldn't think of any other traditional folk song that actually has this motif of someone tying ribbons around your waist, hat, arm, whatever, to signify that you are not emotionally unavailable, but relationshiply unavailable. Sort of things.
Yeah,
That
I know. I mean,
where's that come from?
yeah, I mean, and it's all those little curiosities that make it appealing to me,
Yeah, sure.
while having a trajectory of a story that kind of overarches that. So, like, there are all the little nuggets of details along the way, and the little curiosities and so on. But you've still got this thing about, a young couple. The the boy dies after a couple of years, and she's left in grief. And
Yeah.
so you can relate to that, at any age. And but yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing. And she's in my version, it's like she one day when she was walking down by the college wall, she saw 24 young men playing at bat and ball. Two teams of 12, maybe playing
Maybe,
cricket.
yeah.
I don't know, whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe.
and and she asked them for her true love, but they wouldn't let him come to her. Now, we don't know if he was one of the 24 or if he was somewhere else, but they wouldn't let him come to her anyway. They said he was too young
Yeah.
at that point. But then in the next verse, at the age of 16, he was a married man. At the age of 17, she bore to him a son. At the age of 18 the green grass, it grew over him. Sudden death had put an end.
We get a bit of a montage there, don't we? A quick time jumps
Yeah.
through the rest of the story.
Yeah, and of course, part of that montage is the fact that my text is a montage. But, I didn't really stray from
No.
the standard path, really.
And I find it interesting that depending on the order of verses at the end, you can treat this as a tragic ballad or you can treat this as a tragic song with an uplifting ending, because more often than not, you get the two verses. You get one about, I'll make my love a shroud, and I'll watch over this child while he's growing, and you have the one about cruel, the one about the ages, father to a son, and at the age of 18, the grass grows over his grave, whatever.
Yeah.
Cruel death has put an end to his growing, and some traditional singers had them so that the death was at the end, so that it became a tragic end, and some versions had the more uplifting, and I will watch over his son while he's growing,
Yeah.
first to end, rather the way around. So
Yeah.
depending on the order of the verses, you can give this an uplifting ending, or you can
Yeah.
choose to end it in a mad depression.
Yeah.
Which way round is yours in that one?
The last verse is, the grass growing over him so thick. I will sit here and mourn his death until the day I die. So she isn't looking at a future of finding another relationship, or anything like that. And I'll keep watch over his son while he's growing. To me, the way that I read that or understand that is that it's like, he died at the age of 18. I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that my son doesn't have the same fate.
Right, yeah, sure.
And it's kind of a resignation type ending.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's also, that's a very, very valid read on the thing. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can look at these songs, aren't there, and this kind of summary and stuff.
But I think the thing that this conversation reveals is that there's just great richness there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you don't get so much of that in a lot of contemporarily written stuff.
No, it's there's a lot under the surface of these old songs, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's just the thing of songs that tell stories.
Yeah. And as we've proven, this song is very, very popular. As Sandra and I found, we had an overabundance of field recordings to recommend.
Yeah,
And again, overabundance of singers on the revival side of the folk scene to recommend as well.
yeah. But as we were saying earlier, there's plenty of people of my kind of first wave generation, people who got started in the 1960s, um, have versions of this. But I'm wondering if kind of people who've come up, kind of the young performers who've come up to, Generation Z kind of thing, are they picking up on this at all to do it? And songs like it, or it'd be interesting to sort of do a connection.
Yeah, there are some. There are a good deal of. I'm consulting as I always do, mainly Norfolk, a fantastic resource
Yeah,
of recordings of each song. I know there are people. I mean, on the podcast that is a precursor to this one in a way. John Wilkes, who was a guest in the last season of the podcast, had a podcast called the Old Songs Podcast, and it was very similar to what we're doing here. And he had Emily Portman and Rob Harbron on to talk about this song
right.
because they did it on an album in 2022.
Yeah,
And Holly Clark, who was a guest at the end of my first season of In the Roud, had an EP in 2022, and it's on there as well. So,
right.
and she's
So
in
there
a,
are people still picking it up.
that. Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think some of I guess because they're older performers, some of the older performers ones are considered sort of in inverted commas classics because
Yeah,
those recordings have been around a lot longer. And so I've got a few to recommend. I mean, you mentioned earlier on the Martin Carthy one
yeah.
on his first album, which is great. And I also wanted to point out that Martin Carthy recorded it again in 2009 on the album Head of Steam by Brass Monkey.
Right.
Fantastic band was
Yeah,
Martin Carthy, John
absolutely.
Kirkpatrick, Martin Brinsford on percussion, and a trumpet player and a trombone player,
Yeah, yeah,
and a wonderful band. And
yeah,
yeah, it's there's a version of it on there. I
yeah,
can't actually, off the top of my head, remember if it's Martin essentially reviving the same version that was on.
yeah. I'll have to go put the CD on after we finish this and check it out.
Yeah, but certainly that's there. Tony Rose recorded it,
Yeah,
which I think it's always worth listening to Tony Rose.
yeah, yeah. He had a good
Um,
nose for a good song.
yeah, in fact, it's on his second album called Under the Greenwood Tree from 1971, and I've just noticed his sleeve note says this song has the trees that grow high has been quite unashamedly learnt from the version noted by Sharp from Harry Richards of Curry Rival, and I think that's one of the sources for yours.
Curry Rival.
Rival, beg your pardon, but I think that's one of the sources for your version, isn't it? I think.
I definitely think, look, I looked at his, I can just look at my list here. Harry Richards, a Curry Rival, yeah.
There we go. So that's a nice connection there. So there are bits of yours that are from his version, or at least
Yeah.
linked to that. Yeah, people always put a recommend. I mean, Peter Bellamy, for example, absolutely astonishing singer and concertina player.
Yeah.
He sang.
Actually, I've never heard that, and I kind of thinking of Bellamy's kind of stentorian, kind of proclaiming kind of style. I don't know how you would handle kind of
Yeah.
tragedy.
Well,
of
it's
this.
on the 1979 LP, Both Sides Then,
Yeah,
one of
right.
his seminal ones, and that's the Walter Pardon version. He just
Yeah, right.
learned that one and did that because he was obviously a big exponent of the Norfolk singers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That one I wanted to highlight. I don't really think I've mentioned his singing on the podcast, but someone, I don't know if you've heard of him, Dan Quinn.
Oh, yeah.
Dan Quinn and Will Duke. This is Dan Quinn, my father, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And for listeners, and him and Will Duke, Sussex Anglo-concertina player who learnt from Scan Tester, one of the greats. They made two albums. 1996's Wild Boys and 2001's Scanned, and on Scanned is two or three songs from the singing of Mary Ann Haynes, and one of them is Longer Growing. and they learned that one. So I mentioned, and I played a bit of Marion Haynes in the break. And if you track down Dan Quinn and Will Duke on Bandcamp, you can buy Scanned with Longer Growing on it.
Yeah, right.
One thing I mentioned in the previous half, but then I cut it out of the edit, so no one's heard it, was I mentioned an album called Songlinks. Songlinks has come up on the podcast a couple of times. Martin Wyndham Reed project. Songlinks 1 was a CD of English folk songs, and the second all recorded by new recordings by professional singers and musicians. And the second disc was those songs, their Australian variants. And Songlinks 2 was English songs and their American variants. And on the English side of Songlinks 2 was John Copper, Bob Copper's son, who is now in his 80s, singing Trees That Grow High, learnt from his dad Bob. And so that's an extra recommendation for the trad side of things from earlier. But I want to recommend, because it's brilliant, on the American side, Tim Erickson, the fantastic Tim Erickson, brilliant singer, banjo player, guitarist, leader of the fantastic folk rock band Cordelia's Dad, amongst other things. He sang Longer Growing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was called Long Growing, or it might have been called Bonnie Boy. I think some of the American ones were called Bonnie Boy.
Right.
And I'm just looking that up now, and I'll edit around this. Tim Erickson. Yeah, I can't remember. I think it was called Bonnie Boy, but anyway. Jackie Oates, very good friend of ours, is on your album. She's on Hadlin, isn't she?
Yeah.
Tracks. Jackie Oates recorded it, and she was on our Patreon for the Wassail episode back in January. She sang a version on her album Saturnine from 2011. And Barry Dransfield, as a final recommendation, Barry Dransfield, very famous, singing of it with his brother Robin as well. And they recorded it on their first album in 1970, The Root of the Blues.
Mm-hmm.
And then years later, in 1994, Barry recorded it on his own solo album, Be Your Own Man. Mm-hmm. And there is a brilliant YouTube video someone took of Barry in his own house in France at the time, singing and playing the fiddle for this song. Right. It's a wonderful bit of footage, and I always recommend Barry Dransfield. So that's a good list. And of course, it's on Hadlin by Chris Foster.
Yes.
Which is available to buy, I assume, from somewhere.
On Bandcamp, of course.
It's on Bandcamp, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can even buy the song itself on its own for £1.
Well, there you go. I assume that on Bandcamp, you can buy the physical CD as well as just download. Yeah. Good, all hail physical media.
Yep.
We're just really promoting that. Lovely stuff. We'll end there. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. This has been absolutely marvelous. Lovely to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great, and I'm sure at some point in the future we'll have you back for another song. Or maybe even on the Patreon, then you can pick 3 songs of your own choice, your own choosing, and they can be from any
DJ.
They can be from anywhere in the Roud Index. I know this is wrapping up now. You were on when you were over here last year, and we did a gig for you in Sheffield.
Yeah.
You were talking to me about a relatively obscure child ballad that Sir something or other.
Sir Aldinger.
So maybe that's one for a Singer's Choice mini season with you on the Patreon.
Yeah, that's a weird one because in Child there's just a text and no music.
Right.
And so but it's a great story. So I decided that I would just make a tune up and be able to sing it. And actually there's 2 texts in Child. So I kind of boiled the 2 into one and then made a tune for it. And I recorded it I think it was on my Outsiders album.
That's right. Yeah,
and bugger me, almost at the same time, Brian Peters released his ballads album, and there was he'd done the same thing as I did with his version. So there's it's like London buses. You get none, and then 2 come at once.
Well, Brian does the history sides of some episodes of the podcast, particularly if they're songs that he has sung in the past and therefore has done some research on. So maybe if we get you on for a Singer's Choice 3 episode thing, Brian might end up being the history guest for that.
Yeah,
I haven't
right.
asked him. He'll probably listen to this episode. Hi, Brian.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a possibility for the future. But in the meantime, though, Chris Foster, thank you very much.
Thank you. The trees they grow so high, and the leaves they do grow green. The time has passed and gone, my love, that you and I have seen. It's a cold wind and a winter's night, and I must lie alone. My bonny boy was young, but he was growing. Oh, father dear, oh, father, you do me cruel wrong. You have married me to a boy, and I think he is too young. For he is only 16 years, while I am 21. That boy, he is too young and still growing. Oh, daughter dear, oh, daughter, I've done to you no wrong. Though I've married you to the bonny boy, he is not too young. When I am dead and in my grave, he'll prove to you a man. The boy, he may be young, but he's growing, and I will send him off to college for another year or two. Then perhaps in time, my love, he will do for you. I will buy a bunch of blue ribbons to tie around his bonny waist, to let the ladies know that he's married. One day when she was walking down by the college wall, she saw 24 young men playing at bat and ball. She asked them for her true love, but they would not let him come to her. They said he was too young and still growing. So at the age of 16, he was a married man. At the age of 17, she bore to him a son. But at the age of 18 years, the green grass it grew over him. Sudden death had put an end to his growing. She made for him a shroud that had a linen so fine, and every stitch she put in it, her tears come trickling down, crying, once I had a bonny boy, but now I have got never a one. Cruel death has put an end to his growing. Oh, and now my love is dead and in the churchyard laid. The green grass it grows over him so very, very thick. I will sit here and mourn his death until the day I die, and I'll keep watch over his son while he's growing.
That was Chris Foster singing The Trees They Grow So High. And that brings us to the end of the episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on this song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk, or you can visit the podcast on various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, X, we're still hanging in there on X, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would really appreciate it, very much so, if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. Over on our Patreon, we've just finished a Singer's Choice mini-season with special guest George Sansom, where we've covered 3 songs chosen by him. So we had episodes on Roud 1185, The Bonnie Light Horseman, history from Steve Gardam. Roud 592, that's the song Lovely Joan, and history from Vic Gammon. And Roud 1538, The Dream of Napoleon, history from Steve Roud. If you feel so moved to support the podcast financially, then please do head on over to patreon.com/intheroud and you can sign up for either £5 or £10 per month and receive regular bonus content. This week's Patreon episode, which comes out tomorrow, Thursday the 29th of May, we have our second ever Collector Spotlight episode. I will be joined by singer and musician Katie Ryder to delve into the life and song collecting work of Frank Kidson. Sign up to hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. In the Roud is a media partner to Veteran, the traditional music label. This week's song is included on 2 of their releases. When May is All in Bloom, sung by Bob Copper, and A Shropshire Lad, sung by Fred Jordan. You can find these albums and more on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Sandra Kerr and Chris Foster. Join me next week for episode 2. We will be looking at Roud 32, which is child ballad number 33. That's the song Kempy K. As with one song in the previous season, this is a song which barely anyone has ever sung. So I've enlisted friend of the podcast Helen Lindley to dive into the history and subject matter and also do a brand new setting of the song for us too. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.